The store was already buzzing with the quiet noise of footsteps and soft chatter when a woman stepped inside, moving with a calmness that seemed to set her apart from the rush of others. She wasn't dressed in bright colors or expensive brands, just a plain blouse and an old pair of shoes that looked like they had walked many roads. Her hair was neatly tied, her face peaceful, and she carried no designer bag to draw attention. She looked around slowly, her eyes moving from one shelf to another, not with the hurried eagerness of most shoppers, but with a thoughtful patience, as if she was searching for something more than just products. A few customers glanced her way, but quickly lost interest. She blended into the background like any ordinary visitor, someone who could walk in and out without leaving a trace. Yet, there was something about the way she stood, the way she carried herself, that hinted at a quiet confidence beneath her simple appearance. The store lights reflected on her calm expression, making her seem almost unreadable, as though she was carrying a story no one could guess just by looking. The workers behind the counter noticed her, but didn't bother to offer a warm greeting, their eyes sliding over her with indifference, assuming she was just another window shopper who wouldn't spend much. She didn't react to their lack of interest. Instead, she continued to browse with patience, her fingers brushing lightly across a few items, as if weighing their worth in her mind. Each step she took was steady, unhurried, and strangely deliberate, like she already knew where this visit would lead. No one in the store realized that her simple clothes and quiet presence hid a truth far greater than they could imagine. In that ordinary morning visit, she appeared to be just another unnoticed customer, but the silence in her eyes carried the weight of something extraordinary waiting to unfold, something that would soon turn the entire atmosphere of the store upside down. From behind the polished counter, the store manager lifted his head, and his eyes immediately caught sight of the woman who had just entered. He studied her from a distance, not with kindness, but with the sharp judgment of someone who thought he had seen this kind of customer many times before. Her clothes were plain, her shoes carried no shine, and her hands held no expensive purse that would suggest wealth. To him, these small details spoke louder than anything else, and in a matter of seconds, he made up his mind she wasn't worth his attention. He convinced himself she was not a serious buyer, just another person wandering through the aisles, perhaps to pass time or dream about things she could never purchase. The faint curl of a smile tugged at the corner of his lips, not from amusement, but from quiet arrogance, as though he already knew her story without needing to hear a single word. His eyes lingered on her a little longer, searching for any hint of value, but the more ordinary she looked, the more certain he became of his judgment. Other customers, dressed in stylish clothes and holding shiny phones, received his nods and quick greetings, while she remained invisible, unnoticed in his world of assumptions. Still, there was something unusual in the way she moved. Her steps carried a steady grace that seemed out of place for someone he believed had nothing. He didn't recognize it yet, but every glance he gave her was building the stage for a revelation he would never forget. Behind his casual stare, the manager thought he had control, that his quick judgment defined who belonged and who did not, but in reality, he was setting himself up for a lesson that would shatter his pride. What looked to him like simplicity was not weakness but quiet strength, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise. The woman walked quietly toward the counter, her eyes scanning a shelf before she turned to the manager with a gentle smile and asked in a polite tone if he could tell her more about a product. Her voice carried no demand, only respect, but the manager barely looked at her. Instead, a smirk spread across his face, the kind that revealed more about his attitude than his words ever could. He leaned back slightly, answering with the shortest replies possible, his tone flat and dismissive, as though her question was an inconvenience rather than an opportunity to serve. Each word he spoke carried an invisible wall, pushing her away instead of welcoming her in. She noticed the difference immediately, for she had seen how he greeted others full of energy and charm when the customer wore polished clothes or carried signs of wealth. To him, her presence seemed almost out of place, like she had stepped into a world where he thought she didn't belong. Still, she remained calm, her hands folded neatly, her eyes steady, refusing to show any frustration. But deep inside, the sting of his disregard was sharp. A quiet reminder of how often people judged, not by character, but by surface. The moment hung heavy, as if the air itself carried the weight of his arrogance, and the silence between his clipped answers stretched longer than necessary. Other customers moved around them, some catching the tone of his voice, but most remained too busy to notice. To the manager, this exchange was ordinary, something he thought he could brush aside, but to the woman, it was the beginning of something much greater. His smirk, his careless words, his belief that she was unworthy of his full attention, all of it was weaving a story he would one day regret. Though she spoke little, her quiet eyes held a strength he could not yet see, a strength waiting for the right moment to break through his false sense of superiority. As the woman moved deeper into the store, quietly observing the shelves with the same calm grace she had carried since entering, the manager leaned toward one of his staff members. His voice dropped low, but not low enough to be hidden, and with a careless chuckle he muttered, "She looks too poor to shop here." The words were sharp, designed not to help but to humiliate, and though spoken under the cover of a whisper, they landed exactly where he intended. The woman heard every syllable, and for a brief moment her steps slowed. Inside, the sting of the insult touched her heart, not because she believed it to be true, but because it revealed how quickly people judged without knowing a single detail of another's story. She could have turned back, she could have confronted him, but instead, she drew in a steady breath and let her silence answer. Her calmness was not weakness, but strength, a shield forged from years of patience and resilience. Around her, the store continued its normal rhythm, customers browsing, cash registers ringing, but within that single corner by the counter, the air grew heavier, almost as if it sensed the weight of the disrespect. The staff member shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to laugh along or remain silent, for even he realized the cruelty in the manager's tone. Yet the woman gave no sign of anger. Her eyes stayed steady, her posture tall, her movements deliberate, as though the words had not broken her spirit but only deepened her resolve. To anyone watching, she looked like an ordinary shopper going about her way. But beneath that quiet surface, a storm of truth was waiting, a storm that would soon overturn the arrogance of those who thought they had the right to decide who belonged and who did not. Inside, the words of the manager echoed like a quiet wound, sharp and humiliating, but the woman did not allow the pain to reach her expression. Her face remained calm, almost serene, with a soft grace that surprised even those who glanced at her after hearing the cruel remark. Years of walking through life had taught her that battles were not always won with raised voices or heated anger, but often with silence, patience, and dignity. She had endured harder tests before, situations where judgment and prejudice had tried to break her spirit, and each time she had chosen to stand taller instead of sinking lower. In that moment, her heart could have pushed her toward confrontation, her lips could have fired back words as cutting as the ones thrown at her, but she held them back, not out of fear but out of wisdom. The humiliation stung, yes, but she knew anger would only give power to the man who had tried to belittle her. Instead, she drew from a deeper strength, the kind that carried lessons of resilience, the kind that reminded her she was not defined by what others saw. Around her, the aisles of the store seemed ordinary, yet for her, every step now carried the weight of decision whether to rise above the insult or let it drag her down. Her eyes remained steady, her lips calm, her posture unshaken, and though no one could read the depth of her thoughts, her silence spoke louder than any retort could have. She was not just holding back words, she was holding back a truth that would soon change everything in that store. The manager believed he had won the moment with his cruel laughter, but what he did not know was that her patience was not surrendered, it was preparation. Each breath she took was a reminder that true power does not always need to be announced. Sometimes, it simply waits for the right moment to reveal itself. The woman walked slowly through the aisles, her eyes moving from shelf to shelf. But her mind was less on the products and more on the people around her. She began to notice the clear difference in how the staff treated others compared to her. When a well-dressed man approached the counter, the manager greeted him with a bright smile, his voice suddenly warm and full of energy, as if every word was dipped in respect. A young woman carrying a designer bag asked about a product, and two staff members hurried to assist her, guiding her through the shelves as though she were a VIP guest. But when the woman herself stepped closer, the air around her seemed to shift into silence. No one offered her help, no smiles were directed her way, and the same staff who, moments ago, were lively and attentive now, pretended she wasn't even there. It was as if her plain clothes and simple presence had rendered her invisible in a place where appearance seemed to be the ticket to respect. Still, she remained calm, watching every gesture, every tone of voice, every little act of courtesy that was given freely to others, but denied to her. It was not the products she was interested in anymore, it was the character of the people who worked there, the test of their fairness, the truth hidden beneath their practiced customer service smiles. Her silence gave her the perfect position to observe without being noticed, and what she saw only confirmed the arrogance she had already sensed. Yet, even as she realized how deep their judgment ran, she did not allow anger to control her steps. Instead, she carried herself with the same quiet dignity, each movement steady, her heart whispering that this moment, though painful, would reveal something much greater in time. Little did the staff know that while they were busy proving their bias, they were also writing the very lesson that would soon be delivered back to them in a way they would never forget. The woman finally walked back toward the counter, her hands empty, her steps steady, and her face calm as though she carried no weight from the insults she had quietly endured. The manager, however, seemed to grow bolder with every passing moment, mistaking her silence for weakness. As she approached, he leaned slightly forward, a mocking grin tugging at his lips, and with a laugh that carried both arrogance and cruelty, he said, "Maybe this place is too expensive for you." His words cut through the air like a blade, sharp and deliberate, meant not only to wound her dignity, but also to drive her out of the store. The sentence hung in the space between them, catching the attention of a few customers who glanced over in curiosity. Sensing that something was unfolding beyond a normal shopping visit, the staff nearby exchanged awkward looks, some shifting uncomfortably, yet none dared to correct their manager. The woman heard every word, and though the sting reached her heart, her expression did not falter. Her eyes remained calm, steady, and almost unreadable, as if she carried a strength that could not be touched by such shallow cruelty. To the manager, her silence confirmed his belief that she did not belong. But to those who truly observed, her stillness carried a quiet power, a patience that seemed almost too controlled for the moment. She could have turned to leave, she could have raised her voice in protest, but instead, she stood firm, letting the weight of his insult hang longer than he expected. In his mind, he had pushed her away with his words, yet what he failed to realize was that his arrogance had only built the stage for his own downfall. Every smirk, every dismissive tone, every cruel laugh was leading toward a moment he could not yet imagine, a moment when the very woman he thought unworthy would reveal the truth that would turn his mockery into regret and his pride into shame. The woman did not reply to the insult, nor did she turn away in defeat. Instead, she stopped right where she stood, lifting her eyes to meet the manager's with a calmness that unsettled him more than any angry word ever could. For a brief moment, the entire store seemed to fall into silence, as though the hum of footsteps and the chatter of customers had been swallowed by the weight of her stillness. Her gaze was steady, not sharp or hostile, but filled with a quiet strength that carried an unspoken warning. The manager, who had been so confident in his mocking laughter, shifted uneasily under her eyes, though he tried to cover it with another crooked smile. Around them, other customers began to notice the unusual exchange, their own shopping momentarily forgotten as curiosity pulled their attention to the strange tension at the counter. They had heard his dismissive tone, they had seen his smirk, and now they were drawn to the silence that felt heavier than words. The staff, too, stood uncertain, their eyes darting between the manager and the woman, sensing that something was about to happen but not knowing what. The air grew thick, charged with an invisible energy, as though the room itself was holding its breath, waiting. To those watching, it looked as if an invisible line had been drawn, the kind that often comes before a storm breaks loose. Yet the woman did not raise her voice, did not show anger, and did not let a single expression of weakness slip across her face. She simply held her ground with dignity, and in that moment, her silence spoke louder than any confrontation could have. It was the kind of pause that carried suspense, the kind that told everyone present that the story was far from over, and the real revelation was just waiting to be unveiled. The silence stretched a little longer, and while the manager believed he had embarrassed her into leaving, the woman's calm expression told a very different story. With slow, deliberate movements, she reached into the plain bag resting against her side. The gesture drew even more eyes toward her, for there was something purposeful in the way her hand moved, something that hinted she was about to reveal more than anyone expected. The manager raised an eyebrow, half amused, thinking she was finally going to fumble for money she didn't have, ready to confirm his cruel judgment. But instead of pulling out a wallet or coins, her hand emerged with a small leather folder, worn yet elegant, the kind of object that carried an authority far greater than any stack of bills. She placed it gently on the counter, her eyes never leaving his, and the quiet confidence in her movement was enough to stir whispers among the nearby customers. There was no rush, no hesitation, only a steady certainty, as though she knew this was the moment she had been patiently waiting for. The manager's smirk faltered slightly, curiosity mixing with unease, but he quickly forced a laugh to cover it, pretending not to care. Yet, deep inside, a shadow of doubt began to creep in, for the woman's demeanor was not that of someone defeated, but of someone in complete control. The leather folder sat between them like a sealed secret, radiating an importance that even those watching from a distance could sense. No one yet knew what it contained, but the weight it seemed to carry in her hand spoke louder than words. It was not money, not a receipt, but something far more powerful. The atmosphere thickened as every second passed, and though the room remained quiet, anticipation hung in the air. In that moment, the woman was no longer the invisible shopper, dismissed by appearance. She was someone about to change the story entirely, and everyone watching could feel it coming, like the first roll of thunder before a storm. The manager's laughter faded when the woman slowly unzipped the leather folder and drew out a single sheet of paper, neatly folded but stamped with a seal that immediately caught the attention of those close enough to see. Without rushing, she laid it flat on the counter, her movements precise, as if each second was meant to build the weight of the moment. The manager leaned forward, his smirk tightening into confusion, and his eyes flicked over the bold letters at the top of the page. There, clear and undeniable, was her name, followed by the title that struck him harder than any insult could: Chief Executive Officer of the very company that owned the store he managed. For a heartbeat, silence gripped the air tighter than before, and even the faint hum of the background seemed to vanish. Customers nearby craned their necks, catching enough of the words to understand what had just been revealed, and soft murmurs began to ripple through the store. The staff froze where they stood, their earlier indifference turning into shock as they realized the woman they had ignored was not only important, but the highest authority of them all. The manager's face turned pale, his confident grin now replaced with disbelief. his lips parting as if to speak but no sound leaving his throat. The woman, however, did not gloat, did not raise her voice, and did not boast. Her expression remained calm, her presence steady, her eyes fixed firmly on him, as if silently reminding him of every dismissive word he had thrown her way. In that simple act of placing the document on the counter, she had overturned the entire story, transforming herself from the unnoticed customer he thought unworthy into the very person who held his future in her hands. The truth had unfolded, not with noise or anger, but with quiet dignity, and it was that silence, paired with the undeniable weight of the document, that made the revelation more powerful than any dramatic outburst ever could. The moment the manager's eyes landed on the bold letters spelling out her title, the laughter that had danced so easily on his lips vanished, as if stolen from him. His smug expression collapsed, and in its place appeared a pale stiffness that betrayed the panic rising inside him. Just seconds ago, he had felt powerful, certain that his judgments and cruel words had placed him above her, but now the ground beneath his confidence seemed to disappear. The realization struck him with the weight of a falling stone. The woman he had mocked, dismissed, and humiliated was not only a customer, but his new CEO, the very person he had been instructed to respect and impress. 1,000 thoughts clashed in his mind at once. The whisper she had heard, the laughter he had aimed at her, the insult about the store being too expensive, all of it flashing back like pieces of evidence in a trial he could not win. His throat tightened, his tongue stumbled, yet no apology managed to form because the shock held him captive. The staff, who had silently followed his lead earlier, now stared wide-eyed, their expressions a mirror of disbelief and unease. Customers nearby, sensing the gravity of the moment, leaned closer without moving their feet, their eyes locked on the scene, as if watching a drama unfold live before them. The woman, however, did not need to say a word. Her calm, unshaken presence was louder than anything he could hear. Each second of silence pressed heavier on his chest, until he could feel the weight of his own arrogance crushing him. His pale face, once so full of smug confidence, now betrayed the truth. He was caught, unmasked, and utterly powerless before the very person he had failed to recognize. In that instant, he understood that every smile he had withheld, every ounce of respect he had refused, had been directed at the one person whose opinion mattered most. The manager stood frozen, his pride crumbling in front of the very woman he had ridiculed. But instead of meeting his arrogance with fury, she chose a path that none expected. She leaned slightly closer, her voice calm, steady, and soft, yet every word carried the weight of authority and truth. "This store doesn't sell kindness," she said, her tone neither sharp nor angry, but it should. "Respect is free, yet priceless." The sentence fell into the silence like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that reached every corner of the room. Her words were gentle, but they pierced deeper than anger ever could, striking not only the manager, but also the staff who had stood by, and even the customers who had witnessed the cruelty. The power of her voice lay not in volume, but in the undeniable wisdom it carried. She could have shouted, she could have demanded obedience, but instead she chose to teach, and that choice transformed the moment into something unforgettable. The manager's pale face grew even paler as her words echoed in his mind, reminding him that true worth was never measured in clothing or money, but in the way one treated another human being. Around them, the silence grew thick with reflection, for even the customers felt as though the message was meant for them as well. The woman's calmness revealed the strength of someone who did not need to fight to prove her power. Her presence, her dignity, and her simple reminder of respect were enough. It was in that quiet rebuke that the greatest lesson unfolded, one that carried more force than punishment ever could. Her words hung in the air, unforgettable, a truth that no one in the room would be able to walk away from without feeling changed. The store, once filled with the usual sounds of footsteps and murmurs, had fallen into an unusual silence as every customer nearby turned into an audience to the scene unfolding before them. They had witnessed the manager's mocking laughter. They had heard the dismissive words. And now they were watching the same man shrink under the quiet power of the woman he had tried to belittle. There was no shouting, no chaos, yet the weight of the moment pressed heavily on everyone present, making even the air feel different. Some customers exchanged glances, their eyes wide with disbelief, while others simply stood still, absorbing the lesson that had revealed itself without warning. Slowly, heads began to nod, not in gossip, but in silent agreement, as though each person was admitting within themselves that the woman's words carried a truth too deep to ignore. Respect should never be measured by clothing, wealth, or appearance, and in this single moment, that truth had been painted vividly before their eyes. A young couple by the shelves lowered their voices to whispers. A man waiting at the counter stepped back respectfully, and even children clung quietly to their parents, sensing something serious had taken place. The audience did not need to speak for their thoughts to be clear. The fall of arrogance and the rise of humility had played out openly, and it left behind a lasting impression. The manager's pale face was now a mirror of shame, and though no one laughed at his downfall, the silence itself was louder than mockery. It was the kind of silence that comes when people realize they have witnessed something bigger than an argument. They had seen a reminder that dignity is not tied to status, but to humanity. And as they watched the woman stand tall, her calmness unshaken, many silently carried her message into their own hearts, promising themselves never to let appearances decide the respect they owed another human being. The manager's lips quivered as he struggled to find the right words, his earlier arrogance now replaced with visible regret. His laughter had vanished, and in its place came trembling sentences that carried no pride, only shame. He lowered his eyes, unable to meet the steady gaze of the woman he had ridiculed moments before. The same man who had mocked her clothing and questioned her worth now stood humbled, realizing the weight of his mistake in front of both his staff and the customers who had witnessed everything. I am sorry, he finally managed to whisper, the words uneven, yet genuine, as if they had been forced out of a heart that had just discovered its own flaws. His apology was not just to her, but to everyone around, a recognition that dignity was not something to be handed out based on wealth or appearance, but something every human being deserved by default. The silence in the store deepened, each person waiting to hear whether his regret was real or just another mask. His hands shook slightly as he tried to explain himself, but no excuse could wash away what had been done. The woman's calm expression, however, offered no anger, only a quiet strength that made his shame heavier than any harsh words could have. The staff shifted uneasily, embarrassed for their superior, while customers watched, some with stern faces, others with pity. For the first time, the manager understood how small pride looked when compared to true respect, and he felt the crushing truth that his role as a leader had meant nothing without kindness. His apology, broken and clumsy, was the first honest act he had shown that day, and though it did not erase his behavior, it marked the beginning of change within him. He had mocked a stranger, but he ended up learning a lesson that would follow him long after this moment, a reminder that humility is the only ground on which real dignity can stand. The woman's gentle smile carried more strength than any sharp reply ever could, and as she looked at the manager, the staff, and the customers who had gathered in silence, she spoke words that would echo long after she left the store. "Let this be a reminder," she said softly, her voice steady yet warm. "Success isn't measured by what you wear, but by who you are." The sentence, simple as it was, struck deeper than any lecture. People who had judged others before based on appearance suddenly felt their own hearts shift, while those who had been silent witnesses now carried a story that would stay with them for life. The manager's head hung low, the weight of her words pressing on him harder than her title ever could, while the staff stood frozen, realizing that respect must always come before assumptions. For the customers, it was more than just an awkward incident. It was a lesson dressed in real life, a truth revealed in an ordinary store on an ordinary day, yet powerful enough to change how they would treat others in the future. Without anger, without pride, and without showing off her position, the woman had left behind a memory no one would be able to erase. As she walked slowly toward the door, every step she took seemed to mark the difference between arrogance and grace, between shallow judgment and true humanity. She didn't need to remind them that she was the CEO. Her actions had already done more than any title could prove. By the time the glass doors closed behind her, the silence in the store was not just awkward but was heavy with reflection. Everyone present knew they had seen something rare, a moment where humility had defeated arrogance and wisdom had replaced cruelty. She had entered as a stranger mocked for her simple appearance, but she left as a symbol of grace, teaching a truth so clear that no one inside that store would ever forget it.